My name is Lydia Moore, and I'm 34 years old. Last week, I watched my parents hand my sister the keys to a Tesla, the deed to a $130 million penthouse, and a future that was supposed to belong to both of us. Everyone cheered. Cameras flashed like lightning in a storm I couldn't escape. And I stood there smiling, pretending I wasn't invisible, pretending that the weight pressing down on my chest wasn't suffocating me, pretending that I hadn't spent my entire life being the shadow they walked past without noticing. Before I tell you what happened when a stranger handed me an envelope that night, an envelope that changed everything, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because this story, it's not about jealousy. It's not about bitterness or envy or any of those easy words people use to dismiss what it feels like to be forgotten by the people who are supposed to love you most. This is about what money can't buy and what silence can't kill. For as long as I can remember, my sister, Vanessa, was the chosen one, the prodigy, the golden child, the one whose name my parents said with pride instead of that careful, measured tone they reserved for me. Harvard Law at 21, Global Humanitarian Awards by 25, a career that made headlines, a face that made our family name mean something in rooms I would never be invited into. And me? I taught art to children with learning challenges. I spent my days in a cramped studio with paint-stained floors and secondhand easels, helping kids who'd been told they weren't smart enough, weren't good enough, weren't enough, teaching them that their hands could create beauty even when the world told them they were broken. My parents never said it out loud. They didn't have to. In their eyes, I was the one who didn't make it, the one who chose a small life, the one whose ambitions were quaint, whose work was sweet but ultimately meaningless in the grand calculus of family legacy. When they introduced Vanessa at parties, their voices swelled with joy. Our daughter, the attorney. Our daughter, the activist. Our daughter who's changing the world. When they introduced me on the rare occasions they did, their voices flattened. Our other daughter, she works with children. Other. That word hung in the air like smoke. I couldn't stop breathing. I learned to make myself smaller, to laugh at the right moments, to nod when relatives asked, "So when are you going to do something real with your life?" To pretend that every dismissal was water off my back instead of another crack in a dam that was barely holding. When they called her the family's greatest success, I clapped like everyone else. My hands came together mechanically, producing sound without feeling, applause without approval from myself. But inside, I felt something break. Not from envy, though. That's what they would have called it if they'd bothered to look closely enough to see the pain written across my face. No, this was deeper. This was the accumulated weight of years spent being unseen, of pouring your heart into work that matters, into tiny hands and frightened eyes, and small victories that never made it onto anyone's highlight reel, and having it dismissed as if your entire existence was a footnote in someone else's success story. There's a special kind of pain that comes from loving people who can't see you, from standing in the same room with your family and feeling like a ghost, from screaming silently inside while wearing a smile that everyone believes because they want to, because it's easier than acknowledging what they've done to you. I remember one Tuesday afternoon, I must have been 32, when a little girl named Emma finally drew her first picture after 6 months of frozen fear. She'd been so traumatized by her past that she couldn't hold a crayon without shaking. But that day, she drew a sundae. Just a simple yellow circle with rays shooting out in all directions. She looked up at me with tears streaming down her face and whispered, "I made something beautiful." I called my mother that night to tell her about it, to share this moment that had made my entire year worth living. She listened politely for maybe 30 seconds before interrupting. "That's nice, dear, Vanessa just got appointed to the International Criminal Court Advisory Panel. Can you believe it? 33 years old. We're having a party next month. You'll come, won't you? I said yes. I always said yes. And I hung up the phone and stared at the wall of my small apartment, the wall covered in drawings from my students, in thank you notes from parents, in evidence of a life spent making things better in ways that would never trend on social media or get mentioned in TED Talks. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not soft tears, but the kind that come from somewhere deep and ancient, from the place where you store all the hurts you're not allowed to acknowledge, because acknowledging them means admitting that the people who should have protected you are the ones who wounded you most. The night of the party. The ballroom glittered with gold chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks above 200 guests, dressed in clothes that cost more than I made in a month. Champagne flowed like water. Laughter bounced off marble walls. Every surface gleamed with a kind of wealth that announces itself without speaking, that makes you feel poor even when you're standing in the middle of it. This wasn't just a party. This was a coronation. A public declaration of who mattered in the Moore family hierarchy. And everyone had gathered to witness it. I arrived early because that's what you do when you're trying to be good. When you're still hoping that maybe this time they'll notice. Maybe this time you'll be enough. I wore a blue dress I'd bought on sale 3 months ago. Simple. Elegant enough not to embarrass anyone. Invisible enough not to draw attention away from where it belonged. Vanessa arrived 45 minutes late in a custom gown that probably cost more than my annual rent. She looked perfect. She always looked perfect. Hair like silk, smile like sunshine, every gesture calculated to convey both humility and absolute confidence. People swarmed her immediately. Phones came out. Selfies were taken. My sister had become the kind of person everyone wanted to stand next to, as if success was contagious, as if proximity to excellence could elevate you. I stood near the back, holding a glass of champagne I didn't want, trying to look like I belonged at my own family's party. And then my father took the stage. The room fell silent. Not the natural quiet that comes when someone speaks, but the eager, anticipatory silence of people who know they're about to witness something important. He cleared his throat, smiled that public smile he'd perfected over decades of business deals and country club dinners. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who's learned to perform emotion. "We're here to celebrate someone truly extraordinary. Someone who has made the Moore name synonymous with excellence, with dedication, with a kind of success that comes once in a generation." My chest tightened. I knew what was coming. I'd known since the invitation arrived, with Vanessa's name embossed in gold and mine printed in plain black beneath it. "My daughter Vanessa," he continued, and his voice actually broke with pride, "has accomplished more in her 32 years than most people dream of in a lifetime. Harvard Law, international recognition, a career devoted to justice and human rights. She is without question the greatest achievement of our family." People cheered, glasses raised, cameras flashed, and then he said it. The words that would replay in my mind for weeks, for months, the words that finally crystallized everything I'd been feeling into one sharp, undeniable truth. To Vanessa, the only true success of the Moore family. The only. That phrase sliced through me like a blade between ribs, precise and devastating. Not one of our successes, not our proudest achievement, the only. As if I didn't exist, as if 34 years of my life of showing up, of loving those kids, of trying so hard to make my parents proud even in my small, insignificant way, had never happened at all. The applause continued. Nobody noticed me flinch. Nobody saw the color drained from my face, or the way my hand trembled so badly I had to set down my glass before it shattered. My mother joined my father on stage, tears streaming down her face as she embraced Vanessa. Real tears, genuine emotion. The kind of love I'd seen directed at my sister 1,000 times, but had felt from them maybe twice in my entire life. And then came the gifts. A Tesla gleaming white, unveiled with theatrical flair in the parking lot, visible through the ballroom's floor-to-ceiling windows. The crowd gasped and applauded as if this was the most generous thing they'd ever witnessed. A penthouse, not just any penthouse, but a $130 million palace in the sky with views of the entire city, with more square footage than some small towns, with the kind of luxury that exists only in magazines and dreams. A trust fund, the details whispered, but substantial enough that people turned to each other with raised eyebrows and impressed nods. The future handed over in packages wrapped in ribbon and sealed with the promise that Vanessa would never have to worry, never have to struggle, never have to wonder if she was enough, because she would always have more than enough of everything. Cameras flashing, smiles shining. Congratulations offered like prayers at an altar of achievement. And me. Me in the back of the room, holding that glass of champagne like it was a mask I could hide behind. Like if I smiled hard enough and clapped loud enough, nobody would notice that I was dying inside. That's when I noticed him. An older man in a charcoal suit, standing alone near the entrance. He wasn't watching Vanessa. He wasn't taking photos or offering congratulations or participating in the collective worship of my sister's success. He was watching me. His eyes were steady, sad, knowing. He looked at me the way you look at someone drowning, with recognition and sorrow and the weight of understanding what's happening beneath the surface. Our eyes met across the crowded room, and something in his gaze told me that he saw me, really saw me. Not the smile I was wearing or the role I was playing, but the person underneath. The one who was breaking apart while everyone around her celebrated. I looked away first. I wasn't ready for that kind of seeing. I'd spent so long being invisible that visibility felt dangerous, exposing, like standing naked in a spotlight. But I could still feel his eyes on me. Even as the party continued, as the speeches gave way to dinner and the dinner gave way to dancing, I felt his presence like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The envelope. The party stretched on for hours, an eternity compressed into celebration, every minute another reminder of my place in this family's hierarchy. People lined up to take selfies with Vanessa like she was a monument instead of a person. She handled it with grace, as she handled everything, smiling, laughing, making each person feel like they mattered, like their moment with her was special. I watched from the periphery, nursing the same glass of champagne I'd been holding for 2 hours, warm and flat, and somehow perfectly symbolic of how I felt. That's when he approached me. The man in the charcoal suit moved through the crowd with quiet purpose, the kind of movement that doesn't draw attention but can't be stopped. He walked like someone carrying important news, like someone who knows things other people don't. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the lines around his eyes, the gray in his carefully trimmed beard, the sad kindness in his expression. "You don't know me," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the music and laughter. Before I could respond, he pressed something into my hand. An envelope. Thick cream paper, expensive, sealed with red wax that felt like it belonged to another century. My fingers closed around it automatically. I looked down at it, then back up at him, confusion clouding my thoughts. He leaned closer, and I caught the faint scent of old books and cologne, the smell of someone who spent time in libraries and courtrooms and places where words mattered. Then he whispered 5 words that froze me in place, that stopped my breath and my heart and the world around me. "Your grandfather knew the truth." The noise of the party faded. The laughter and music and clinking glasses became distant, muffled, like I was underwater and the celebration was happening somewhere above me, in a world I could no longer reach. My heartbeat didn't fade. It grew louder, pounding in my ears like drums, like warning bells, like something ancient waking up after a long sleep. "What?" I managed to whisper, but he was already moving away, disappearing back into the crowd with the same quiet purpose he'd arrived with. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. It was heavier than it should have been, heavier than paper and wax had any right to be. My grandfather. He died 4 years ago, when I was 30. The funeral had been large and formal, and everyone had cried the appropriate amount and said the appropriate things. My father gave a eulogy about legacy and success. Vanessa spoke about his dedication to excellence. Nobody asked me to speak. I sat in the back row and grieved silently, the way I'd learned to do everything in this family. My grandfather had been kind to me, in a distant way. He'd attended my college graduation, had written me a check for $1,000 with a note that said, "For your future." But we'd never been close. He was busy, important, a man who built empires and didn't have time for grandchildren who taught art to struggling kids. Or so I thought. I slipped the envelope into my purse with shaking hands. My mind raced with questions, with possibilities, with a fear I couldn't name, because naming it would make it real. The truth. What truth? What had my grandfather known that I didn't? What secrets lived inside this envelope that some stranger thought I needed to have, needed to know, needed to carry? I lasted another 20 minutes at the party. I smiled. I congratulated Vanessa, hugging her with arms that felt like they belonged to someone else. She thanked me absently, already turning to the next person, the next photo, the next moment of validation. My parents didn't notice when I left. Why would they? I'd been leaving rooms unnoticed my entire life. The days that followed, I didn't open the envelope that night. I couldn't. Some part of me knew that whatever was inside would change everything, and I wasn't ready for everything to change. I'd spent 34 years building a life around being the lesser one, around being overlooked and dismissed and forgotten. As painful as it was familiar. It was what I knew. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days. I circled it like it was dangerous, like it might explode or disappear or turn out to be empty, some cruel joke that would confirm everything I'd always feared about my place in this world. I went to work. I taught my classes. I helped Emma draw her second picture house this time, with windows and a door and smoke coming from the chimney. Progress. Small, beautiful progress. But the envelope haunted me. At night, I'd wake up thinking about it, imagining what might be inside. Documents, money, a letter from my grandfather explaining why he'd never really known me. The truth. What truth? On the 4th day, I found a business card tucked into the wax seal. I'd missed it before, too shaken to notice. Simple, elegant, expensive. Richard Chen, attorney at Law Estate Planning and Family Trust Management. A phone number. Nothing else. My hands shook as I dialed. It rang twice before a receptionist answered. Professional and courteous. I gave my name. I mentioned the envelope. There was a pause, then. "Mr. Chen has been expecting your call, Miss Moore. He has time this afternoon if you're available." This afternoon. As if my life could change between breakfast and dinner. As if the ground could shift beneath my feet in the space of a few hours. I said yes. I always said yes. The meeting. His office was in an old building downtown, the kind with marble floors and brass fixtures, and the quiet dignity of old money. Not flashy, not trying to impress, just solid, established, real. Richard Chen met me in a conference room lined with law books and paintings of landscapes I didn't recognize. He was older, up close, maybe 70, maybe more, with the kind face of someone who's seen too much pain and decided to be gentle anyway. "Miss Moore," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Thank you for coming. I know this must be confusing." Confusing. Such a small word for the chaos raging inside me. "You said my grandfather knew the truth. I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended, sharp with 4 days of sleepless nights, and questions that had no answers. What truth? What is this? He sat down across from me, folding his hands on the table. Your grandfather, Thomas More, was my client for 43 years. I handled his estate planning, his business affairs, his personal matters. I knew him well. Okay, I said, waiting. He made his final will 3 months before he died, Richard continued. He was very specific about his wishes, very clear about how his estate should be distributed and why. My heart pounded. And that will was never executed. Your parents buried it. They found an earlier version one he'd written 15 years before, when Vanessa was just starting college and you were still finding your way. A version that was much more conventional in its distribution of assets. The room tilted. What are you saying? Richard opened a briefcase and pulled out a document. Thick, official, covered in legal language and signatures and seals. He slid it across the table to me. Your grandfather changed his mind about what success meant, he said quietly, and he wanted to make sure his true wishes were honored. That's why he gave me very specific instructions about what to do if his final will was suppressed. I stared at the document. My name was on the first page, not Vanessa's, mine. I don't understand, I whispered. Your grandfather spent the last 3 years of his life watching both of his granddaughters very carefully, Richard said. He saw what Vanessa was becoming: brilliant, accomplished, but also calculating, focused on image, on recognition, on building a legacy that looked impressive from the outside. He paused, his eyes soft with something like pity. And he saw what you were becoming, the work you did, the children you helped, the quiet, unglamorous, essential kindness you brought into the world without ever asking for credit or recognition or reward. My throat tightened, tears burned behind my eyes. He told me once that he'd spent his whole life chasing the wrong things, Richard continued. Building empires, making money, collecting accolades. He said that at the end, when you're lying in bed knowing your time is running out, none of that matters. The only thing that matters is whether you made the world a little bit better, whether you loved people well, whether you saw the ones everyone else overlooked. I couldn't breathe. The tears came now, hot and unstoppable. He saw you, Lydia. He watched you give everything to children nobody else wanted to teach. He watched you struggle financially while your sister accumulated wealth. He watched your parents dismiss you year after year, and it broke his heart. Richard pushed the document closer. This is his true will, the one he wanted executed, and in it, he left you everything. Everything. The word hung in the air like something impossible, like something from a dream or a fairy tale or someone else's life. The company, the properties, the investments, the foundation, all of it, Richard said. Not because he didn't love Vanessa, but because he realized that wealth should go to the person who will use it to create more kindness in the world. And that person was you. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was hearing. My entire understanding of my place in this family, in this world, in my own life, it was crumbling, rearranging, becoming something new and terrifying and impossible to comprehend. There's more, Richard said gently. He reached into the envelope I'd brought with me, the one still sealed, and carefully broke the wax. Inside was a letter, written in my grandfather's shaky handwriting. He handed it to me. The letter: My dearest Lydia, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and Richard has done what I asked him to do. I'm sorry it had to be this way, secret, complicated, requiring courage from you at a moment when you're probably already in pain. But I had no choice. I knew your parents would never honor my true wishes. They've spent too many years worshiping at the altar of conventional success to understand what I'm about to tell you. You are the success of this family. Not Vanessa, as brilliant as she is. Not your parents, as accomplished as they believe themselves to be. You. I know you don't believe me. I know you've spent your whole life being told that your work doesn't matter, that your choices were wrong, that you should have aimed higher, achieved more, become someone different. But I watched you, Lydia. I watched you more carefully than anyone knew. I saw you with those children. I saw you stay late on Tuesday evenings to help a little boy who couldn't hold a paintbrush steady. I saw you spend your own money to buy supplies when the school's budget ran out. I saw you cry in your car after a parent told you that you'd given their daughter the first moment of joy she'd had in 2 years. I saw you love people that society had given up on. I saw you build them up, piece by piece, color by color, until they could see beauty in themselves again. And I realized something that should have been obvious all along. Real success isn't measured in awards or money or prestige. It's measured in how many people are better off because you existed. It's measured in small moments of kindness that nobody photographs or celebrates, but that change everything for the person receiving them. You've been succeeding your entire life, my dear, and nobody noticed because success isn't supposed to look like you. It's supposed to look like Vanessa, polished and powerful and profitable. But here's what I learned in my final years. When death becomes real and you start understanding what truly matters. At the end of your life, nobody cares about your net worth or your awards or your fancy titles. They only care about whether you made them feel loved, whether you saw them when they were invisible, whether you used whatever gifts you had to make their suffering a little bit lighter. You did that. You do that. Every single day. And so I'm giving you the resources to do it on a scale you've never imagined. Not because you asked for it, not because you wanted it, but because you've already proven what you'll do with it. The money, the company, the properties, they're not rewards, Lydia. They're tools. And I'm trusting you to use them the way I should have used them, but never had the courage to. Make the world kinder. Make it softer. Make it safer for the people everyone else ignores. Your parents won't understand. Vanessa won't understand. They'll fight you. They'll claim I was senile or manipulated or wrong. They'll argue that you're not equipped to handle this kind of wealth, that you don't have the business experience or the education or the social standing. Let them argue. You have something more important than any of that. You have a heart that sees people. And in the end, that's the only qualification that matters. I love you, my dear. I'm sorry I didn't tell you more often. I'm sorry I let your parents' expectations cloud my judgment for so many years. I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you when you needed someone to. But I'm standing up for you now. Live well, love fiercely, and never let anyone convince you that kindness is anything less than the highest form of success. With all my heart, grandfather. The aftermath. I sat in that conference room for an hour after Richard left, holding my grandfather's letter, reading it over and over until the words blurred and my tears made dark spots on the aged paper. He'd seen me. All along, he'd seen me, when nobody else looked. When my parents were too busy celebrating Vanessa. When I felt most invisible, most forgotten, most convinced that my life was a waste, he'd been watching. He'd been keeping score in a way that counted the things that actually mattered. The enormity of what he'd given me, not just the money, though that was staggering, but the validation, the recognition, the proof that I hadn't been wrong to choose the path I'd chosen. It was almost too much to hold. But underneath the gratitude, underneath the shock and the joy and the overwhelming sense of being seen, there was something else. Anger. Hot, righteous, decades-old anger that came roaring up from some deep place I'd tried to keep buried. Because if my grandfather knew, if he saw, if he understood, then he also watched my parents dismiss me year after year and said nothing. He watched them hand Vanessa everything while I struggled to pay rent and said nothing. He watched me shrink and fade and disappear and said nothing until he was gone, until he couldn't face the consequences, until I had to stand alone with this truth and figure out what to do with it. The anger felt good. It felt cleansing. It felt like finally having permission to acknowledge what had been done to me, to name the hurt instead of swallowing it down and pretending everything was fine. I was furious at my parents, furious at their blindness, their cruelty disguised as high standards, their willingness to sacrifice one daughter's soul to prop up another daughter's image. I was furious at Vanessa, not for being successful, she'd earned her accomplishments, but for never once noticing what her success cost me, for never once asking if I was okay, for accepting every gift, every praise, every privilege, without ever questioning why I received none of it. I was furious at myself, for being so desperate for their approval, for trying so hard for so long to be something they'd value, for not walking away years ago when it became clear that I would never be enough in their eyes. But most of all, I was furious at the waste, at all the years I'd spent doubting myself, at all the nights I'd cried wondering what was wrong with me, at all the times I'd looked at my life and felt like a failure because I'd measured myself against their yardstick instead of my own. I'd let them convince me I was less. And that was the greatest theft of all, the confrontation. I called a family meeting 3 days later. My parents, Vanessa, and the family attorney. Richard came too, with documents and evidence and the calm, unshakable certainty of someone who knows the law is on his side. We met in my parents' house, the same house I'd grown up in, the same rooms where I'd learned to be quiet and invisible and grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. My father sat at the head of the table like always, my mother beside him, both of them confused about why I'd called this meeting. Vanessa was on her phone, half paying attention, probably assuming this was about me needing money or asking for help with something. Richard laid out the documents, the will, the letter, the evidence that my grandfather's final wishes had been deliberately suppressed. The room fell silent. Not the comfortable silence of a family gathering, not the peaceful quiet of people who love each other, but the terrible, heavy silence of people realizing they've been caught. My father turned red, then white. His hands shook as he picked up the will, reading it with growing horror. This can't be," he stammered. "It's legal," Richard said calmly, "and it's binding." Thomas More was of sound mind when he wrote this. He knew exactly what he was doing, and you knew that when you chose to execute the earlier version instead. My mother made a sound like something breaking. We thought he wasn't thinking clearly. He was old. He didn't understand. He understood perfectly, I said, and my voice came out cold, harder than I'd ever heard it. He understood that you'd been measuring success wrong, that you'd built your entire value system around money and prestige and image instead of anything that actually matters. "Lydia," my father started. "No," I cut him off. The anger was rising now, hot and clean and unstoppable. "You don't get to talk yet. You don't get to explain or justify or make excuses. You need to sit there and listen for once in your goddamn life." Vanessa's head snapped up. I'd never cursed in front of them before, never raised my voice, never been anything but quiet, accommodating, grateful Lydia who knew her place. "Do you know what it's like?" I continued, and my voice shook with rage and pain and 34 years of swallowed words. "To spend your entire life being invisible to the people who are supposed to love you most? Do you have any idea what you did to me? We gave you everything," my mother tried. "You gave me nothing." The words came out like a scream. "You gave Vanessa everything. The attention, the pride, the validation, the support, the money, the future. And you gave me the message, over and over again, that I wasn't enough, that my work didn't matter, that my choices were wrong, that I was the disappointment, the lesser one, the child you had to apologize for. That's not true, my father said, but his voice was weak. It is true. You said it at the party, the only true success of the Moore family, not one of the only, as if I don't exist, as if 34 years of my life and all the children I've helped and all the work I've done means nothing because it's not prestigious enough for you. Vanessa was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Maybe she hadn't. Maybe I'd been invisible to her too. I taught children who everyone else gave up on, I continued, and tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't wipe them away. I showed up every day to a job that paid nothing because those kids needed someone to believe in them. I poured everything I had into making the world a little bit softer for people who were suffering, and you dismissed it. All of it. As if the only lives that matter are the lives of people with money and power and the right credentials. We're proud of you, my mother started. Liar, I said flatly. You've never been proud of me. You've been embarrassed by me, confused by me, disappointed in me. But proud? Never. The silence that followed was devastating, because they couldn't deny it. The truth hung in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. Vanessa spoke for the first time, her voice small. I didn't know you felt this way. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Of course you didn't. You were too busy being worshipped to notice that I was dying right next to you. That's not fair, she said. And there was anger in her voice now. I worked hard for everything I achieved. I earned it. I'm not saying you didn't, I replied. But you never questioned why you got everything and I got nothing. You never asked if maybe the way our parents divided their love and attention and resources was hurting me. You just took it all and convinced yourself you deserved it while I deserved nothing. She flinched. Good. Let her feel a fraction of what I'd felt. The company, the foundation, the properties, they're mine now, I said, turning back to my parents. Grandfather left them to me, not because he didn't love Vanessa, but because he trusted me to use them the way he should have. To build something that matters. To help people who need help. You don't know anything about running a company, my father said desperately. You have no business experience. You'll destroy everything he built. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I'll turn it into something worth more than money. Either way, it's mine now, and you can't stop me. Richard laid out more documents, transfer papers, legal notices, proof that everything my grandfather owned was now in my name. My parents looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Vanessa sat very still, her perfect facade cracking, showing something raw and confused underneath. I don't want revenge, I said finally, and my voice was gentler now, tired. I don't want to hurt you the way you hurt me. I just want you to understand what you did. I want you to see me, finally, after all these years. My mother was crying. We do see you. No, I said. You see what you want to see. You see the daughter who disappointed you, but you don't see the person I actually am, the work I've done, the lives I've changed, the way I've succeeded, in all the ways that actually matter. I stood up, gathering the documents. I'm going to use this inheritance the way grandfather intended. I'm going to build something that helps people, and you're all welcome to be part of it or not. That's your choice. But I'm done trying to earn your approval. I'm done making myself small so Vanessa can shine brighter. I'm done pretending that your version of success is the only version that matters. I walked toward the door, my heart pounding, my hands shaking, my whole body vibrating with adrenaline and anger, and something that might have been freedom. Lydia! My father called after me. I stopped but didn't turn around. We do love you, he said, and his voice broke. I know, I said quietly, but love isn't enough. Not when it comes with conditions. Not when it requires me to be someone I'm not. Not when it means sacrificing my soul to fit into your narrow definition of worthiness. And then I left. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Not because I didn't care, but because caring had nearly destroyed me, and I needed to save whatever was left. The reckoning with self. The weeks that followed were chaos. Lawyers, accountants, board members, business partners who'd worked with my grandfather for decades and now looked at me with barely concealed skepticism. A 20-something art teacher with no MBA, no business experience, no qualifications except a letter from a dead man saying she was worthy. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to prove everyone wrong. To show my parents and Vanessa and every person who'd ever dismissed me that I was capable of more than they'd imagined. But mostly, I was terrified. Because inheriting money is one thing. Inheriting responsibility is another. And I'd been given responsibility for hundreds of employees, for investments worth hundreds of millions, for a legacy that had taken my grandfather 60 years to build. What if I failed? What if they were right about me all along? What if my kindness and my good intentions weren't enough to navigate the brutal world of corporate finance and real estate empires? I spent nights staring at spreadsheets I didn't understand, reading reports full of jargon that might as well have been another language. I attended meetings where men in expensive suits talked around me, like I wasn't there, making decisions without consulting me, treating me like a figurehead who'd sign whatever they put in front of her. And I felt that old familiar feeling creeping back, in the sense that I was out of my depth, that I didn't belong, that I'd been given something I had no right to have. But then I'd think about my grandfather's letter, about his words. Real success isn't measured in awards or money or prestige. It's measured in how many people are better off because you existed. And I'd remember why he'd given this to me, not because I knew how to run a corporation, but because I knew what mattered, because I understood that wealth without purpose was just numbers on a page, because I'd spent my entire life learning to see the people everyone else overlooked. So I stopped trying to be what they expected. I stopped pretending to understand things I didn't. I stopped trying to prove I belonged in their world. Instead, I brought my world to them, the transformation. I called another meeting, this time with the entire executive team. 20 people sitting around a conference table in a room that cost more to furnish than most people make in a year. They looked at me with that same polite condescension I'd seen in my parents' eyes my whole life, waiting for me to embarrass myself, waiting to go back to business as usual once this phase passed. I want to show you something, I said. I pulled up a presentation I'd spent 2 weeks creating, not with fancy graphics or corporate buzzwords, just photos. Simple, honest photos of my students. Emma, drawing her third picture of family holding hands. Marcus, who'd been kicked out of 3 schools for behavioral problems, carefully painting a sunset. Sophia, who hadn't spoken for a year after her father died, laughing while covered in finger paint. These are the children I taught, I said. Every single one of them had been labeled as a problem, as unteachable, as someone the system had given up on, and every single one of them just needed someone to see them, to believe they had value, to give them tools to express themselves when words failed. The room was silent. Some of them shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what they'd expected. My grandfather built a company worth over $2 billion, I continued. He created wealth that will last generations. He was brilliant and driven and successful by every conventional measure. I paused, looking at each of them. And at the end of his life, he decided that none of it mattered as much as what I was doing in a cramped studio with second-hand supplies and kids nobody wanted. Someone cleared their throat. A woman at the end of the table, the CFO, I'd learned, spoke carefully. With respect, Miss Moore, we have shareholders to consider, quarterly earnings, Fiduciary responsibilities. We can't run a corporation like a charity. Why not? I asked. She blinked. I'm sorry? Why can't we? I leaned forward. Why can't we use this company's resources to actually improve the world? Why can't we measure success, not just in profit margins, but in lives changed? Why does it have to be one or the other? Because that's not how business works, a man across from me said, his tone patronizing. Business exists to generate returns for investors. Anything else is secondary. My grandfather was the primary investor, I said calmly. And his return on investment was seeing these children smile. That's what he wanted his money to create. More of that. More moments where people who've been broken get put back together. That's very idealistic, the CFO said. But the reality is that I own this company, I interrupted. And there was steel in my voice now. Me, not you, not the board. Not the shareholders who've been getting rich while contributing nothing to the actual world. Me. And I'm going to use it the way my grandfather wanted, to build something that matters. The room erupted. Objections, concerns, warnings about legal implications and financial disasters, and reputation damage. They talked over each other, over me, their voices rising in panic at the thought of someone disrupting their comfortable system. I let them rage for a minute. Then I stood up. Here's what's going to happen, I said, and my voice cut through the noise. We're going to restructure this company. We're keeping the profitable divisions, but we're redirecting 30% of our annual net income into a foundation. A real foundation. Not one of those tax shelter pretend charities that rich people use to feel good about themselves. 30%? Someone gasped. That's non-negotiable, I continued. That foundation will fund art therapy programs in underserved communities, mental health services for children in poverty, training programs for teachers who work with traumatized kids. Every single thing I wish I'd had more of when I was teaching. You can't just, the CFO started. I can, I said, and I am. Anyone who doesn't want to be part of this can resign. I'll write you a generous severance check, and you can go work for some company that only cares about shareholder value. But if you stay because you believe that wealth should serve more than just the wealthy. I looked around the room. Some faces were angry, some were shocked, but a few, just a few, looked curious. Intrigued, like maybe, possibly, someone had finally said something they'd been thinking for years, but never dared to voice. My grandfather gave me this company because he trusted me to use it wisely, I said, not to maximize profits, not to play it safe, but to take everything he built and turn it into something that actually helps people. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I walked out of that meeting not knowing if I'd still have a company by the end of the day. Half of them might resign. The board might try to fight me. The shareholders might sue. But I'd finally done something I'd never done before. I'd chosen my own values over other people's expectations. I'd stood up and said, "This is what matters to me, and I'm not apologizing for it." And that felt like the truest kind of success I'd ever known. The rebuilding. 8 executives resigned within a week. The ones who couldn't imagine working for a company that valued kindness over profit, who saw my vision as naive and dangerous and doomed to failure. But 12 stayed. And in the weeks that followed, I watched those 12 transform from skeptics into believers. We worked 16-hour days, restructuring, reimagining, building something that had never quite existed before. A for-profit company with the heart of a nonprofit, a business that understood that helping people and making money weren't mutually exclusive. The CFO who'd objected so strongly in that first meeting, she became my closest advisor. Turned out she'd spent 20 years watching wealth flow upward while communities crumbled, and she'd been waiting for someone to say that there was another way. We bought buildings in neighborhoods everyone else had abandoned. We hired teachers who'd been burned out by the system and gave them resources and support and the freedom to actually teach, instead of just managing trauma. We created programs that wrapped around children like safety nets, catching them before they fell too far. And slowly, impossibly, it worked. The for-profit divisions stayed profitable. We weren't making as much money as before, but we were making enough. And what we were doing with that money, the lives we were changing, the hope we were building, it made every dollar feel like it mattered, in a way it never had before. I turned my grandfather's company into something he would have been proud of. Not because it was making more money or expanding faster or dominating the market, but because it was making the world measurably better. 6 months in, we opened our first center, a beautiful building in a neighborhood where beauty was rare, with art supplies and therapy rooms and spaces designed specifically for healing. We named it the Thomas More Center for Creative Healing. My parents came to the opening. They stood in the back, watching as children who looked like they'd been through war picked up paintbrushes and started creating. Watching as parents cried with relief because someone finally saw their struggling kids as valuable instead of broken. My mother found me afterward. Her face was wet with tears. "I didn't understand," she said, her voice breaking. "All these years, I didn't understand what you were doing," I thought. I thought success had to look a certain way. I thought if you weren't like Vanessa, you weren't. She couldn't finish. But I knew what she meant. "You weren't wrong about what Vanessa accomplished," I said gently. "She's brilliant. She's done important work. But there are different kinds of important, different ways to leave a mark on the world. Your grandfather saw that," she said. "He tried to tell us, but we wouldn't listen. We were too caught up in our own ideas about what mattered. I wanted to be angry. Part of me still was. But standing there, watching those children create, watching hope bloom in spaces where hope had died, I found I didn't have room for anger anymore. Just sadness for all the wasted years, and a strange, complicated relief that maybe, finally, they were starting to see. "You can help," I told her. "Both of you, if you want to." She looked at me with desperate hope. "How?" "The same way everyone helps. Show up, see the children, listen to their stories. Use whatever you have time, skills, resources to make their lives a little bit easier." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was an opening. A possibility that we might rebuild some small bridge between the people we'd been and the people we were becoming. Vanessa. My sister called 3 months after the opening. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, overwhelmed with the daily work of running a company and a foundation, of trying to be the person my grandfather had believed I could be. But something made me pick up. "Lydia," she said, and her voice was different, smaller, uncertain in a way I'd never heard from her before. "Can we talk? In person?" We met at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. She arrived looking less perfect than usual hair in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup, wearing jeans instead of designer clothes. She sat down across from me, and for a long moment, she didn't speak, just looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally began. "At that family meeting, about how I never questioned why I got everything and you got nothing." I waited. "You were right," she continued, and there were tears in her eyes. "I was so focused on achieving, on being the best, on making Mom and Dad proud. I never stopped to think about what it was costing you. I never looked at you and asked if you were okay. I just took everything and convinced myself I'd earned it." "You did earn it," I said quietly. "Maybe," she said. "But that doesn't mean you didn't earn things too. Different things, important things, and I should have noticed. I should have been your sister instead of your competition." She pulled out her phone and showed me something. A photo of her sitting on the floor of the Thomas More Center, surrounded by children, paint on her hands, laughing with a joy I'd never seen on her face before. "I've been volunteering," she said, "every Saturday for the past month. I didn't tell anyone. I needed to understand what you'd been doing all these years, what grandfather saw in you that I couldn't see." My throat tightened. "Those kids," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "They're incredible, Lydia. The way they open up, the way they transform when someone actually sees them." I watched a little girl who'd been completely shut down start talking after 3 weeks of art therapy. Just started talking. Like we'd unlocked something in her that had been trapped. "That's what it is," I said softly. "That's what I've been trying to tell everyone. There are children everywhere who just need someone to see them, to believe in them, to give them tools to heal themselves." "I get it now," Vanessa said. "I get why grandfather gave you everything. Not because you're better than me, but because you already knew what it took me 32 years to learn, that the best use of privilege is to share it with people who have none." We sat in silence for a moment. Two sisters who'd lived parallel lives without ever really knowing each other, finally beginning to see. "I don't need your forgiveness," she said finally. "I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry for taking up all the air in every room, for never making space for you, for being so blinded by my own success that I couldn't see you were succeeding in ways that mattered more. I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. Because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. Because she was trying, and trying was more than she'd ever done before. "Can I keep volunteering?" she asked. "At the center?" "Of course," I said. "We need all the help we can get." She smiled, and for the first time in our lives, it felt like we were actually sisters, not competitors, not examples of success and failure. Just two women trying to figure out how to live well in a world that makes it so very hard. The penthouse. Remember that $130 million penthouse my parents gave Vanessa at the party? The one that symbolized everything I would never have, everything I would never be? She gave it to me. Well, technically, she gave it to the foundation. But since I ran the foundation, same difference. "I don't need it," she said when she signed the papers. I thought I did. I thought having the biggest, best, most expensive things would make me feel successful. But it just felt empty. Like living in a museum where I was the least interesting exhibit. We turned it into a residential program for children aging out of foster care. Kids who'd spent their whole lives being shuttled from home to home, who'd never had stability or safety or anyone who believed in them. We gave them their own rooms. Beautiful rooms with big windows and soft beds and spaces to create. We gave them art therapy and academic support and job training. We gave them what everyone deserves, but so few receive a chance to heal, to grow, to become whoever they were meant to be before trauma tried to kill them. The first resident was a 17-year-old girl named Maya. She'd been through 14 foster homes in 12 years. She'd been abused, neglected, forgotten, dismissed. She'd aged out of the system 3 months earlier and had been living in her car, trying to finish high school while working 2 jobs. When we showed her the room that would be hers, really hers, not borrowed or temporary or dependent on someone else's goodwill, she broke down sobbing. "Nobody's ever given me anything," she cried. "Nobody's ever thought I was worth investing in." I knelt down beside her. "You've always been worth it. The system failed you, but you never stopped being worthy." She lived with us for 2 years, graduated high school, got accepted to college, started therapy to deal with everything she'd been through. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, she started believing that maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she was just someone who'd been hurt and was learning to heal. At her college graduation, she found me in the crowd, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "You saved my life," she whispered. "No," I said. "You saved your own life. I just gave you a safe place to do it. But I was lying, because she'd saved my life too. She and Emma and Marcus and Sophia and all the other children who'd taught me what success actually meant. They'd shown me that my life hadn't been wasted. That every hour I'd spent in that cramped studio, every dollar I'd scraped together for supplies, every tear I'd cried over kids the world had given up on, it had all mattered. It had mattered more than penthouses and Teslas and awards and all the things my family had spent years chasing. The cost. But I'd be lying if I said it was easy. If I said that inheriting wealth and purpose came without a price. The work was exhausting. Every day brought new crises, new children in need, new problems that money alone couldn't solve. I worked 80-hour weeks. I missed sleep. I skipped meals. I gave and gave and gave until I was running on empty. And some nights, I'd lie in bed and wonder if I was just repeating the same pattern that had nearly destroyed me before sacrificing myself, burning out, trying to save everyone while forgetting to save myself. My therapist, yes. I finally got a therapist. Because you can't pour from an empty cup, and my cup had been empty for years, helped me see that there's a difference between martyrdom and service. Martyrdom says, I'll destroy myself to help others, and my suffering proves my worth. Service says, I'll take care of myself so I can sustainably help others, and my well-being matters too. I was still learning that difference, still learning to set boundaries, still learning that saying no to some things meant I could say a better yes to others, still learning that my worth wasn't dependent on how much I suffered, or how many people I saved, or how perfectly I executed my grandfather's vision. I was enough, just as I was. Even on the days when everything went wrong and I felt like an imposter, and the old voices in my head whispered that I didn't deserve this, that I wasn't qualified, that I should give it all back and return to being invisible. On those days, I'd reread my grandfather's letter. I'd remember Emma's first drawing. I'd think about Maya crying in her new room. And I'd remind myself that impact isn't measured in perfection. It's measured in showing up, trying again, choosing love over fear even when you're terrified. The year mark. 1 year after I'd walked out of that family meeting. 1 year after I'd stopped trying to earn their approval and started building something that mattered. We held an anniversary celebration at the center. Not fancy or formal, just the staff, the volunteers, the families we'd helped, the children whose lives had changed. My parents came, both of them. They'd been volunteering regularly for months now, showing up every week to read with kids, or help in art classes, or do whatever was needed. They weren't perfect. They still had moments where their old values slipped through, where they asked about profitability, or worried about what their friends thought, or suggested that maybe I should hire someone with more experience to run things. But they were trying. And I'd learned that sometimes, trying is the best anyone can do. Vanessa gave a speech that night. She talked about what she'd learned from volunteering, from watching children heal through creativity, from finally understanding what her sister had been doing all those years while everyone else dismissed it. I spent my whole life chasing success, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded room. And I achieved it. I have awards and recognition and a career most people would envy. But I never felt successful until I sat on the floor with a traumatized child and watched her paint her first smile in months. That's when I finally understood what achievement actually means. People clapped. I cried. Not sad tears this time, but something more complicated: grief for what we'd lost, gratitude for what we'd found, hope for what we might still become. After her speech, my father pulled me aside. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, but also somehow lighter, like he'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. "Your grandfather was right," he said simply. "About you, about success, about everything." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just hugged him. And for the first time in my life, It felt like he was really hugging me back. Not the polite, performative embrace we'd always shared, but a real hug. Father and daughter. Imperfect people who'd hurt each other, trying to find their way back. The stranger. Remember the man in the charcoal suit? Richard Chen, my grandfather's attorney, who'd given me that envelope at the party? He came to the anniversary celebration too. I found him standing in front of a wall covered in children's artwork, tears streaming down his face. "I helped your grandfather plan this for 3 years," he said when I approached. "Every detail, every contingency, every possible way your parents might try to stop it. We spent hundreds of hours making sure you'd get what you deserved." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you care so much?" He smiled sadly. "Because 40 years ago, I was one of those kids. Poor, traumatized, written off by everyone. And someone, a teacher I barely remember, saw me, believed in me, gave me books and encouragement, and the message that maybe I could be more than my circumstances." He turned to face me. "That teacher changed the trajectory of my entire life. I became a lawyer because of her, built a career, a family, a legacy, and I spent every day after wondering how I could pay forward what she gave me." "So, when your grandfather came to me with this plan," he continued, "when he told me about you and the work you did, and his vision for turning his wealth into healing, I knew this was it. This was how I paid it forward, by making sure his resources went to someone who would use them the same way that teacher used her time and attention to save a kid everyone else had forgotten." I hugged him. This stranger who'd seen me across a crowded ballroom and known, somehow, that I was drowning, who'd carried my grandfather's final message across the chasm between death and life, who'd believed in me before I believed in myself. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me." "Thank you," he whispered back, "for being worth seeing." The closing. So here I am, 35 years old now, running a company and a foundation, helping children heal, building the kind of success my grandfather dreamed of but never quite achieved himself. Am I happy? That's a complicated question. Some days, I'm exhausted, overwhelmed, doubting every decision, wondering if I'm doing enough, if I'm doing it right, if I'm worthy of this responsibility. Other days, I watch a child who came to us completely shut down start laughing again. I see a family whose life was falling apart find stability. I witness the moment when someone who thought they were broken realizes they were just wounded, and wounds can heal. On those days, I feel something deeper than happiness. I feel purpose, alignment, the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing that my life is being used for something that matters. My relationship with my family is still complicated. We're rebuilding, but you don't undo 34 years of damage overnight. Sometimes I'm angry. Sometimes I grieve what we could have been if they'd seen me sooner. Sometimes I'm grateful just to be seen at all, even if it took this long. Vanessa and I are closer than we've ever been. We're learning to be sisters instead of competitors. She still practices law, but she volunteers 20 hours a week at the center. She's even thinking about transitioning into nonprofit legal work. Turns out, success looks different when you're measuring it in lives changed instead of cases won. As for me, I'm still learning what it means to be the person my grandfather believed I could be. Still learning to accept that I'm enough. Still learning to love myself the way I love those children, with patience and grace, and the understanding that healing isn't linear. Sometimes, late at night, I take out my grandfather's letter and read it again. His words have become a touchstone, a reminder of what matters when everything else falls away. Real success isn't measured in awards or money or prestige. It's measured in how many people are better off because you existed. By that measure, I'm finally, truly successful. Not because I inherited wealth, but because I'm using that wealth to create the kind of world I always believed was possible. One where everyone is seen, everyone is valued, everyone is given the chance to heal and grow and become whoever they're meant to be. The richest gifts don't come wrapped in money. They come wrapped in moments, in small acts of kindness that ripple outward, in the choice to see people who've been rendered invisible, in the courage to build something that matters, even when everyone tells you it's impossible. My grandfather knew that. And now, finally, so do I. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt invisible or dismissed, or like your quiet work doesn't matter, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because here's what I've learned. Your life matters. Your small acts of kindness matter. Your decision to show up for people who need you matters. The world will tell you that success looks like money and prestige and achievements that trend on social media. The world will tell you to aim higher, achieve more, become someone impressive. But I'm telling you this, the most successful people I know are the ones who make life gentler for others, who see the invisible, who use whatever they have, time, attention, resources, love, to make someone else's suffering a little bit lighter. You don't need an inheritance to do that. You don't need wealth or power or your family's approval. You just need to show up, see people, love them in whatever ways you can. That's success. Real, true, lasting success. And if you're doing that even in small ways, even in ways nobody notices, even in ways that will never make headlines or win awards, then you're already succeeding in the way that matters most. You never know. Your quiet life might be the loudest legacy of all. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And thank you for whatever work you're doing in the world that nobody's thanking you for yet. Keep going. You matter more than you know.